I'm here this morning with Representative Jonathan Stickland out of the Hearst, Euless, Bedford area.
You've got it.
And District, what was the number, 92?
It's 92, yes ma'am.
Yeah, this was your first year, wasn't it?
This was our second year.
Second year.
Yeah.
Okay.
First year that we knew what we were really doing.
Oh, well, that's a good way to put it.
There you go.
Well, this was a very interesting year, too.
It was.
And could you tell a difference between your very first year and the transition into the second year, some of the dynamics that changed?
It most certainly was different. Of course, we were mainly focused on the first time of figuring out what's going on, learning the process and whatnot. But I felt like the conservative movement, it was much more clearly divided this session than it was before, because during the last session, when we put them on the record, exposed them for passing a liberal budget and things of that nature under the Republican banner, they then had to go home and be held accountable by the voters. Mm-hmm. And with social media and a number of different groups that are actually out there giving the real story now, a lot of these people had a lot of tough questions that they had to answer. So coming into this session, it was like they were far more hostile towards the conservative movement or any conservative group or any conservative legislator that was out there actually trying to advance constitutional rights and things of that nature. So it was much more hostile this session than last, in my opinion.
And it kind of started the very first day.
It did.
Because of Scott Turner running against Joe Straus for the House.
Right.
And once that vote was done, basically Speaker Straus then announced that the 19 that voted against him were not going to be his favorite people.
Absolutely.
And I was amazed.
Yeah, and it was sad because the 19 people, including myself, who voted for Scott Turner for Speaker, we did so because we wanted more conservative leadership than what we had received in the past. So I thought it was interesting that a Republican Speaker, Joe Straus, would completely dismiss the conservative wing of the party, on day one like that.
Yes.
And the vindictive nature that followed. He kind of prided himself. He came into power originally saying, I want to be the guy that follows the process. I want to be the guy that lets the House do its own work. But the memo went out very quickly that in fact is not what was going to happen. And the session as it unfolded, what we saw was a huge micromanagement of the entire system, from who are the chairman going to be, are they going to follow the will of leadership, micromanaging all the bills and even the clock. I mean, there were times during the session where we had bills that were literally skipped over in the referral process. For instance, my bill to end in-state college tuition for illegals, I think it was House Bill 209, don't quote me on that,
Okay.
But I believe it was House Bill 209, and they had referred all the bills, which is the Speaker's office job, to which committee it was supposed to go to so it can start the process. And they did literally all the way up to 208, skipped 209, and went straight to 210. And by the time we noticed that it had actually done, they had gone all the way up into the 1300s.
Oh my.
Before they did that. So I had to go to the back microphone and say, why hasn't this bill been referred? And it was very, very deliberate micromanagement of the entire process, which was very frustrating.
Did you sense a lot of contention between the Senate and the House as well? Because I know that there were some bills that went smoothly through the Senate, and when they hit the House, everything fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, again, some of the leadership team under Straus literally came out and told us, our job this session is to stop the Senate. Almost. And the Senate had a plan. Dan Patrick had a mandate that he felt he had received from the voters of Texas, who had elected him overwhelmingly against conventional wisdom, political wisdom. And so he had an agenda, and they started day one. He had his low number bills, which were his priority, the top 20 bills, and you saw them spit it out one after another on that side, which we were thankful for. But then the conservative group over in the House were just kind of like, well, when are we going to get to talk about these bills? When are we going to stop doing just the resolutions and going out and everybody having a good time and acting it like everything is all gravy? Conservative bills are dying, and they pushed everything as far back as they possibly do. I had freshmen who were just elected, and they said, "Is is this a normal part of the process that for the first 3 months that we're doing next to nothing? And I told them, I said, do not be fooled. There's a lot going on right now. And what is happening is bills are dying.
Yeah.
Even though we're not taking anything up, a lot is happening behind the scenes.
I think that is something that a lot of people do not understand is the politics that actually goes on. And as you're saying, everything, those first few months, it's like all resolutions and congratulatory to everybody and
everybody's friends.
Oh, they're just fabulous and hunky-dory. And then it's like a light switch gets thrown and the whole dynamics of the place changes and the real uglies come out, because there was a lot of uglies. Not to go into all of that, because it's kind of nice that that's in the past now, and hopefully the future will be brighter in some of those areas. Tell me some of the bills that you worked on that came into fruition that happened for you.
So, we did get some stuff. Open carry, HB 910 was a huge victory for Texas. That was all the grassroots, the pressure. They lit up the phone lines at the Capitol, and I don't think that was a bill that House leadership was very excited about taking on, but the response from the grassroots was overwhelming. We did end up with a more conservative budget than we have in the past. We actually stayed under population plus inflation, which was good. I would have liked to see some of the bills get through that would have mandated that happened in the future too, put some spending restrictions.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we didn't get to that, but in practice on the budget, it did happen. And I think it happened because the conservatives were shining the light on the whole process. One interesting thing that a lot of people don't know, we actually dealt and passed fewer bills than we ever have in the last 20 years in the Texas House, which is typically a good thing. However, we had 473 more record votes than any session in Texas history with fewer bills. And the reason for that is that we worked very hard to put everything on the record this last session.
Very good.
So, typically when amendments are added, they're acceptable to the author. You may never even get a vote on an issue. And typically, especially towards the end of session, amendments, entire bills are being thrown onto other bills that have not necessarily been vetted, wouldn't have gotten through the committee or the calendars process. But because these two people worked out a deal, the author accepts it, and it literally becomes a piece of legislation before any of the people on the floor even have a chance to read it.
Wow.
So we worked real hard at the process and standing up, objecting to it being acceptable to the author, and forcing a vote every single time. And it was amazing. We kind of trained them by the end of session, because we started this endeavor at the beginning, and they were very upset. It was like, how dare that we have to go on the record and have proof of where we stood on this issue. It bothered a lot of people, but by the end they kind of just got used to it. And at the end of the day, we ended up with close to 500 more record votes on things that people care about.
Yeah.
That was a huge victory for us as well.
We know that a lot of bills and issues they died. They were good, but the battle was behind the scenes and they didn't see the light of day.
Right.
Are there some in particular that you were working on that you're still working on to see and to get ready for this next session?
Yes. We obviously did nothing to protect traditional marriage in the state of Texas, even though many of us were screaming at the top of our lungs during the process, hey, we're worried about how the Supreme Court is going to come down, because they hadn't yet when we were in session.
That's right.
But a lot of us knew that was something that could be on the horizon. So we wanted to get in front of that and deal with it and reaffirm that Texas is going to be a place where marriage is between a man and a woman. That was basically off limits and stopped. There were a couple of different measures that we wanted to do on pro-life that didn't get to the House floor through procedural stuff. That was very, very upsetting. We had American Law for American Courts.
Yes.
Which was huge. I mean, it was that one in particular was amazing to watch, because you had over 76 co-sponsors, which 76 is the magic number you need to pass a bill. So you have over 76 co-sponsors on the bill who have signed their name to it, yet we can't get it to the floor. Well, finally, through some political pressure, we get it to the Calendars Committee, And we literally have a Republican member who was a co-sponsor of the bill, but then voted against it in
Yes.
calendars and killed it.
Yes.
And it never came up.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff that people, really need to know that is going on behind the scenes, in my opinion.
I understand that CARE was actually behind that change.
Yes. Well, there's a number of different people who had different stakes in that game. But at the end of the day, what we had one legislator who wanted to get credit for being in support of an issue that a lot of Texans care about. And then at the end of the day, when she has to put her money where her mouth is, pulled the plug and showed us where she really stood.
Yeah.
Which is why, again, it is so important that people look past the rhetoric and look past the campaigns and actually get down to the nuts and bolts of when it was time to say yes or no, what did my representative or my senator do?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I was visiting with Senator Donna Campbell last week, in fact, on that bill, and
Yes.
Chris Byrd, who also worked very hard on it. So I'm glad to know that they are still on board, yourself as well,
Yes.
because that is an important bill that we do need to get passed here. What other type things are you working on during this interim?
Well, we're working on a number of different things. Right now, we're trying to organize the conservative movement a little bit better. We're doing a lot of training on process and rules, teaching some of the newer guys what's going on. That was something that we felt was lacking when we came into the House. One big thing that I'm working on is illegal immigration. We spent a lot of money down at the border securing the border. However, we were not allowed to discuss anything that had to do with what I call turning off the magnets, the things that are actually
Yes.
attracting folks here. And that's the handouts. That's when
Yeah.
government comes and takes stuff out of my pocket and other Texans' pocket to redistribute them out to people who aren't playing by the same rules that we are.
Right.
I'm talking about in-state college tuition for illegals. I'm talking about welfare programs and food stamps and house subsidies and a number of different things. You can secure the border, and that's very important. I'm glad that we were able to do that. However, you still have to deal with what is attracting folks here, okay? And we need to build an environment where people are not encouraged to break our laws to get benefit, but actually encouraged to go about it the legal way and come in and be contributing members of society instead of takers.
How doable do you think that, or reasonable to think something like that could happen in a relatively short period of time?
It could happen. I mean, listen, if people would stop hiding behind the process, you get that stuff to the floor, it'll happen immediately. Because
Very good.
illegal immigration is on the tops of so many Texans. I mean, it's the number one polling issue. It's what people are affected by on a daily basis, whether they've lost their jobs to someone who is here illegally, or the health scares that are going on with all the people coming over here, the crime, the drug cartels, the sex trafficking, and just basically the cost. I mean, that's what is so hard to measure, is the actual cost of social services and using our roads, our water infrastructure and everything else, and then not paying into the system necessarily. So this is a huge issue for Texas, and the fact that the Obama administration and the federal government have pushed the issue off for so long, it just continues to snowball. And we've gotten to a point where Texas, has to do something about it now. So if we could get some of the political games out of the way and get these issues actually to the floor, I have no doubt they will pass. It's just getting past the, all the hoops beforehand that has been difficult so far.
One of the issues that came up toward the end of the session was, I believe it was Senate Bill 19, that it came out of the Senate, that I think the bill typically was basically an ethics bill, but somewhere along the line, some folks in the House decided to somewhat redesign it, and to put it nicely. Will you share your perspective on what that was all about and what happened?
Sure. So Senate Bill 19, ethics was one of the top 5 issues that Governor Abbott came in and said, we have got to do something about ethics reform and get some stronger stuff, because a transparent government is typically a better government. It's something that we support as conservatives in general, I think. So he came out at the very start of session and said, this is one of my top 5 items. And so the Senate passed out Senate Bill 19 by Van Taylor very quickly on. And it was exactly the way that the governor's office had worked with them. It's what they wanted. And I think everybody was on board. However, when it came over to the House, it sat for a very long time. And House leadership decided that this was going to be a vehicle that they used to attack many different conservative groups and advance their own political agenda and essentially punish their enemies. Because what they did is they took out all the things that were in SB 19 and ended up putting in some stuff that had been highly controversial, including some measures that had been vetoed originally by Governor Perry, but more importantly considered very unconstitutional by almost every single constitutional lawyer that you spoke with, whether it was the First Amendment rights that were being trampled or the Fourth Amendment rights. I mean, it ran the absolute gamut there as far as doing the wrong thing. So they took something that was very good, had a lot of steam, and decided at the last minute that they were going to turn it into a political game. And what we ended up with is something that no one ever even had a chance to vote on. And it wasn't taken seriously. They basically torpedoed all the ethics reform by the way that they handled it. They were doing things such as restricting any kind of photography at the Capitol alone. They wanted to turn Texas into they wanted a not just one-party consent, but a two-party consent, which means that this interview would never happen unless I was able to review the tape and give you permission to ever publish it, which just takes out all accountability, all media. It would have changed every kind of reporting in the state of Texas. Yeah. In fact, places that we've seen these kind of policies take place, the media ends up just pulling out. And what ends up happening is the politicians run everything, control the entire story, and end up just patting their own pockets and condensing their own power instead of sending it out to the people, which is what a constitutional republic should have. I remember at the end of SB 19, after hours and hours of debate and people bringing in all these random measures, it became just what we call a Christmas tree, where everyone was coming up and hanging their little bills or their little pet project onto the Christmas tree. I went up and I asked the person who was carrying it in the House, which was Chairman Cook, who's appointed chairman by Joe Straus. And I said, Chairman Cook, how many bills are now contained in this bill? And he couldn't answer the question. Oh my. And I said, Chairman Cook, how many pages does this bill now contain? And he couldn't answer the question. And I said, what all does this bill do? And he couldn't answer the question. This is all on tape. Mm-hmm. And I said, do you really believe that we should vote for this bill today? Because you can then go before the courts and argue the constitutionality of this piece of legislation in a courtroom. And he said, yeah, I think I can. And it was that moment where I realized this is everything that most people hate about government. Wow. You have a bill that even the author does not understand the consequences, a bill that the author hasn't even read himself, but that he is going to stand up there and try and implement after all the concerns that all the groups had raised. Pro-life groups, homeschool groups, church pastors had come in. I mean, there were a lot of different problems that were being concerned. And this guy was more concerned with passing this bill as punishment to his political enemies than actually doing something that was right by the state of Texas. SB 19 became a laughingstock, and it became a huge dark mark on the entire legislative process, because it showed that there are people who are currently holding office who don't care about passing good stuff, but holding on to their own power. And it was kind of the culmination of all of that. It was remarkable to watch. I'm glad that it ended up not passing in its current form after they changed it all. I wish we had been able to do what the Senate had done, because we do need ethics reform in the state of Texas. But frankly, that bill became something that...
a monster.
It was a monster. And I thought it was absolutely horrible that it passed the Texas House in that form, with a majority of Democrats help.
and I think 46 Republicans or something signed on to it, of which you
Yes.
were not one of them.
I was not one of them. And I will tell you, there were forces who literally said, if you don't vote for 19, no matter what the form is, no matter what it contains, okay, if you don't vote for 19, you are voting against leadership. And they used that as leverage, and all the other bills and all the other things that people care about in their own districts, they threatened them with that over making a political statement on that one bill.
The conservative voice is growing in the House
It is.
side. What do you see for the future? Do you see, after such a struggle that there was this year, will the conservative voice continue to grow?
I hope so. I've asked my wife to stick with me, and as long as that continues to happen, I think so. Because here's the difference. So I'm elected as a representative for a 2-year term. For 6 months out of that 2 years, I'm down in Austin, and it is very easy. In fact, most people become consumed with that 6 months, and they think that it encompasses the whole world. But I had the biggest smile on my face on the last day of this last session. And I actually had a reporter come up and say, what's going on with you, Stickland? You know, you had some rough times, you got punished a lot, you know, you didn't win every battle, you know, why are you smiling so big? And I said, because the pendulum is swinging. Right now, literally, today, it is swinging from Austin establishment insiders back to the people. And for a year and a half out of the 2-year term that I serve, I get to go to the grocery store here in Bedford, Texas, drive down the road in Euless, I get to go down to the schools, I get to be in this community, and I don't have to lie or deceive anyone. I can give an account for every single vote that I took. I don't have to distort it. I'm proud of what we did, and there's a lot of people who are back home right now who can't. So the pendulum has swung. That's why I'm excited for the conservative movement. I feel like people are waking up not just to the reality. I mean, Texas, you think this is just the most conservative state, and it is a conservative state, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the elected officials have been acting very conservative.
Right.
And I think with social media and alternative news sources and blogs and text message, everything else, there are people who are watching, who are informed on the process, who never were even just a couple of years ago.
That's so true.
And,
so true.
you know, I laughed at the last election because I had people coming up, you know, saying, well, I'm upset with John Cornyn because of his cloture vote. And I'm like, nobody even knew what a cloture vote was just a couple of months ago. But now people are literally driving to the polls for it. So, you know, and I'm not saying that to pick on any one individual. What I'm saying is that people are understanding the process, they're watching, and I think that people are sick and tired of being sold out by politicians.
I agree.
Who campaign on one thing and then go do another. So I'm excited that the more sunlight that we can bring into this process, and the more that we can get these legislators back at home in front of the voters with a record that they have to defend, the more the conservative movement will continue to trend upward.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
look forward to staying in touch and staying current on what's going on
Yes.
from the inside.
Awesome.
I
Sounds
appreciate
good.
it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.